Please give a big, loud, warm AGC welcome to Nicole Billingsley.
Hello. How's everybody feeling? Good. Do you have any Brene Brown fans in the house? Woo. All right. So we know Brene Brown, her work is about connecting with people through practicing vulnerability. So that's what I'm going to do with you guys here today, is I'm going to practice connecting with you. Is that better? Yeah. Through being vulnerable and sharing some of my story with you. So he shared with you some of my academic accomplishments. So I'd like to share with you how I got to where I'm at and why I do what I do. So this beautiful woman and this beautiful little girl right here is me and my mother. And pain travels through family lines before somebody has the courage to heal it. So not long after this photo was taken, I was removed from my mother for her addiction issues and was raised by my single father. Any single fathers in the house? Awesome job. My dad did such a great job. So I always had a relationship with my mother, but she didn't get the pleasure of raising me because of some choices that she made when she was younger. My mother is no longer with us, and part of that reason is because of her addiction issues. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. In my adolescence, I witnessed domestic violence with my dad and his second wife, and saw some things that a child shouldn't see. And the reason I'm telling you that is so that you understand what's underlying of the rest of what I'm going to tell you. So at the age of 14, I ran away from home and was trafficked into the sex trade. Not in a foreign country, not in California, not in New York, but right here in Minnesota. I met my trafficker at the Mall of America. In fact, Minnesota is the number 3 state for human trafficking in the country. And so I dropped out of school at the age of 14 and began working in strip clubs and escort agencies. And that's really all I knew until I became an adult later on in life. And I started having children early. I had my first daughter at 16, and I was a teen mom and also living that lifestyle. So I was objectified and sold all across the country. And when I got into my adulthood, in my mind, in order to justify what I was doing, I called it a choice because that's all I knew. I should back up a little bit. I also have a history of sexual abuse from a non-family member as a child. So it's important to know that most people who are involved in sex trafficking and in strip clubs and things like that do have a sexual abuse history. So I moved to Las Vegas at the age of 18, and a lot of people go there for that reason because it's commercialized in Las Vegas. I had 2 more children, and the fathers of my children were all abusive towards me, and I ended up being a single mom of 3 kids by my mid-20s and having nothing but a GED. I did get my GED when I was 16 when I was pregnant with my daughter, and no job skills and not knowing how to do anything else other than to sell my body. So that's around the time when I started using drugs. I always had the kind of personality where a little bit was never enough. Very young, I had an addiction to candy. My parents would try to hide it, and I'd find it, and I'd have a fit if I didn't get it. Whether it was money, whether it was clothes, if it was there and it made me feel good, I had to have more. So it made sense that when I started using drugs and alcohol, that was my story, is that I had to have more. And so by the time my kids were 2 and 4 and 12, it got out of control really fast. And so I moved back here to Minnesota thinking that a geographical change would help. And if we know anything about addiction in the room, geographical changes do not help. If we run away from ourselves everywhere we go, there we are. So when I got here and got around family and they saw the kind of lifestyle that I was living and saw the way that I was using, they called and had my children removed from me. So generations tend to repeat themselves if we don't heal that. So the same grandma that helped my dad raise me took my children from me. And she gained custody of them and she adopted them, and I didn't get to see them for 10 years. So in that time, I found something called recovery. And the last time I used drugs and alcohol was in January of 2012. And thank you. Thank you. And, you know, I work in this field now, and I tell people all the time that the first thing you have to do is forgive yourself. Because I will tell you that addiction does not take our dumbest, and it does not take our weak. It takes our brilliant and our strong. Addiction doesn't go after people who aren't going to have an impact in this world. Addiction is a risk-taking disease. We take a lot of risks to feed that. Especially when we're talking about drugs. We know that drugs are illegal. So in order to feed a habit where it's illegal, you take a lot of risks. You break the law. So if you can flip that and apply that to your life in a different manner, we become extremely resilient, powerful, unstoppable people in recovery. And so that's the first thing I had to do, is I had to forgive myself. I had to stand there with this handful of consequences. I didn't get to be a mom. I didn't get to be part of my family. They had wrote me off. And I was all by myself with this wonderful man that I had met, and had to try to pick up the pieces and figure out what my life was going to look like with no education, no job skills. I mean, you have to have some skills to do sex work, but not many. And you know, kind of entrepreneurial, but so I'm like, well, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do? So January of 2012, I stopped using drugs, and in June 2012, I started school. So I started in community college, and I'm like, well, I know addiction, I know that, and I can talk to people about that, and I feel confident, and you know, my social skills were still not there. I got my first job in a restaurant at Applebee's, and I'd walk up to a table and I'd be nervous, and hi, can I help you? And you know, can I get your drinks? And I didn't know how to talk to people, and I learned how to talk to them very quickly in that restaurant, and getting cash every day was good for me because I didn't know how to budget. And so then I met some people in the field, and I got a job in a treatment center. And I started as a receptionist, and I learned stuff really quickly, and I figured out I'm really smart, and I got straight A's in school, and I ended up being the director of this treatment center. I had no idea what I was doing, but I'm like, we're gonna pretend. And I'm like, the guy that owned it was not the brightest light bulb in the box, and I'm like, if he can do this, and he's not passionate about it, he was just doing it for the money, if he can do this, I'm gonna do this one day too. And I kept going to school, and I kept going to school. I've been in school since 2012. Like you guys heard, I'm going to be Dr. Nicole Billingsley this year. Thank you. And amazing things started to happen. You know, this thing called credit. And, you know, my husband and I built a healthy marriage and decided that we were going to try to get my kids back. And this is from family members who weren't talking to me. And so I started showing up at their events, and I started showing up. And my family, the first time my family saw me at one of my son's basketball games, she tried to beat me up in the bathroom. So I have a great relationship with my family now. And my kids moved back in with me in 2018. And so this is me graduating with my master's in 2018. And it's never too late to become who you've always wanted to be. And my husband and I started our treatment center in 2018. We just opened our second location, which we're expanding. We just opened our 5th sober house. We help hundreds of people on a daily basis. We have an amazing team, an amazing staff, and I get to live this every day. I get to tell people this is what your life can look like. 8 years ago, I was homeless. 8 years ago, I was working as a prostitute. I had a GED. And today, I'm working on my doctorate. I'm a business owner. I'm a homeowner. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. Believe it or not, I know I'm not old enough. So what can you do? What does all this mean for you? What this means is that if somebody's hurting, don't look away. Normalize talking about mental health. If I asked you guys to raise your hand if you've in some way been touched by addiction, I bet you every person in this room could raise their hand. Start talking about it. In 2015, only 10% of people who needed treatment received treatment. Why? Because of stigma. We don't talk about addiction. We don't talk about mental health. It's those people. We don't want to talk about those people. We don't want to talk about the underbelly of society. But I can tell you that the opioid use disorder in 2 years has killed more people than Vietnam. This is something we have to talk about. Those of you that are leaders and executives, normalize talking about mental health in your practices and in your business. Do trainings on stress reduction, stress management. I can't tell you the number of people in the last 48 months that I know that have lost people to suicide. Change your perspective. Behind addiction, 85% of people who have addiction issues have childhood trauma. So we're not looking at bad people who are dope fiends or winos. We're looking at traumatized children who have started using substances as a way to manage their pain. So if we can look at people in the eye, that person you see standing on the corner, that hopeless, homeless person, see them, look at them, know that they're people and that there's a reason that they're hurting. So recovery is possible. This picture right here was taken in the summer at the state capitol here in St. Paul. 22 million people are in recovery from substance use disorder, and recovery looks different for all people. Recovery doesn't have to look like going to an AA meeting every day. Some people can use socially, and that's okay. For me, I choose a program of abstinence. I don't drink or use drugs, but that's not everybody's story. So also talk about recovery. You know, applaud people who you know who have overcome substance use issues. And make a difference by just changing your perspective. And understanding that mental health and addiction are okay to talk about. You know, I guarantee there has been each and every one of you sometimes that you felt depressed or you felt anxious and you're like, I just have to hold it together. It's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to not be okay all the time. This is my beautiful family. And last but not least, if someone you know is struggling with an addiction issue, don't give up hope. If they're still alive, there's still a chance that they could come back around and get this thing called recovery. And where there's life, there is hope. Thank you.